Hey guys, I'm Colby, and today's video is about all things Ember. From basic to advanced, builds and abilities, weapons and items that synchronize with her. Let's start with her first ability. Fireball is exactly that, a fiery projectile that can be charged and thrown at the enemy to deal damage. And on impact it leaves a lingering fire patch for 10 seconds with a 5-meter radius. Launching it with a full charge doubles both the initial and the area damage. It has a 50% status chance to proc heat. And something interesting to note is it can be used and charged even while reloading, shooting, and aiming. Unfortunately, this skill is only affected by ability strength. Ability range and duration do not affect the 10-second fire patch or the radius, because God forbid we find a way to mod the skill and make it actually usable. In terms of damage, it's pretty terrible even if you mix an accelerant, and in terms of crowd control, it does have a 50% status chance, so it can proc heat and slow the enemies down. But the only time I would ever consider using something like this is if I was camping and using a thrown melee weapon with condition overload to take advantage of that extra status proc. There is an augment for the skill called Fireball Frenzy, in which you can temporarily buff your teammates' damage. And now moving on to the second ability, Accelerant. This ability is your bread and butter. Even though it doesn't deal any damage in itself, it lets out a wave of accelerant and stuns all enemies and increases fire damage dealt to them. It also increases your casting speed by 50%. Here we have a completely unmodded Ignis, so you can compare the before and after damage with and without Accelerant. 1s and 2s and 8 on crits, and there's the stun. Now we're at 17s and even a 170 crit. The damage multiplier from Accelerant scales off of ability strength, so max strength Accelerant builds can hit insanely hard. All you need to do is mod for heat or use a weapon with innate heat damage. For these examples, I'm using the Ignis, the Atomos, and the Kreska, but there are a lot of different weapons with innate heat damage that you can build on. The augment for this ability is called Flash Accelerant, and it gives you and your allies, if they're within range, 50% casting speed and 50% heat damage. So you can share this incredible damage buff with your squad. And you can mix in the Fireball Frenzy augment from your first ability to give them even more heat damage. Now moving on to her third ability, Fire Blast. Ember slams the ground with a wave of plasma that pushes everything back and leaves a ring of fire on the ground. And shooting through the ring will add 50% heat damage, and you can stack multiple rings. The knockback from the wave can be handy for pushing mobs off a ledge. And in addition to the knockback, it has a 100% status chance to proc heat to panic the enemies. So what it lacks in damage, it makes up for in crowd control. But this ability is not affected by ability range, so the wave and the ring will always remain the same size. Furthermore, the wave cannot pass through obstacles, so we can't spam this ability and hope to crowd control everything. And the augment for this ability is called Fire Fright, and it adds a 100% status chance to the ring of fire, but that's totally pointless because the wave already has 100% status. And now moving on to our fourth ability, World on Fire. World on Fire is a channeled ability where Ember rains down fireballs, dealing a significant amount of damage. The range on this ability will diminish as the damage increases, until finally reaching 100% where the range is halved and the damage is doubled. Energy consumption is also doubled, making the uptime on this ability pretty difficult to maintain. And right off the bat, I want to say that the augment for this ability, Firequake, is the best survivability that Ember has. Of course, you won't need it up until level 30s or 40s since you're one-hitting everything, but at a certain point things aren't dying fast enough and Ember takes a lot of damage. With a 100% chance to knock down enemies, it's very good crowd control for you and your squad mates, because knockdown enemies cannot damage you. Now I'm gonna be honest here, Ember after her nerf is terrible. There is a reason why she's one of the least used frames right now. She doesn't scale up well. After a certain point she just stops dealing damage, or at least enough damage to kill mobs. And fire damage on armored units is just, oh my god. So when I decided to make an Ember video, I almost quit because I couldn't, with good conscience, promote this Warframe. So Ember has three main problems: a lack of scaling damage, a lack of scaling damage reduction, and crazy energy consumption. And I think I've got a workaround for these problems, but first I'd like to show you her passive. Ember regenerates 10 energy per second and increases ability strength by 35% while on fire. So you can trigger this passive yourself if you have a means to inflict self-damage in the form of fire. Most commonly used is the Javelok. It seems you can do it with the Ogress, the Angstrom, and other thrown weapons, but I personally am using the Penta with napalm grenades. And much like the passive, we can also use Growing Power, which increases ability strength by 25% after a status proc. And then there's also Pax Bolt, a arcane for the kit gun that increases ability strength and efficiency by 30% for the next ability after a headshot kill. And if you mod your kit gun right, you can trigger both Growing Power and Pax Bolt at the same time. I wanted to make sure that these all stacked properly, so I tested it out in the simulacrum. And there we have it. Stacking these buffs gives us 90 more ability strength. It can be a little bit tricky to get all 3 buffs up at the same time, but you get used to it. And you only have to do it once until you run out of energy. Speaking of which, energy is one of the major issues for Ember, because while channeling, energy orbs are about the only way you can regain energy. And unless you own the very expensive Arcane Energize, then it just won't be enough. But luckily we have a workaround for this. You can use Syndicate procs Entropy or Blight, and I chose Blight for a number of reasons. Firstly, viral damage works really nicely with heat damage. And secondly, because it allowed me to use the Rock the Dark Dagger with Gleaming Blight. The Rock the Dark Dagger's passive, called Mind Haze, reduces the range from which enemies can spot the player by 33%. Also, attacking an enemy afflicted with a radiation proc will restore your shields and eventually give you overshields. And if you finish an enemy, it will give you max overshields. Not to mention, you can use Covert Lethality on this thing. And another reason for the dagger is the knockdowns from Firequake allow for some very powerful ground finishers. Another option is the Prisma Obex with Entropy Detonation. And as a sparring weapon, it also has a very high ground finisher multiplier. But I still prefer the Dark Dagger because of overshields and, well, fashion. So to summarize this, we have World on Fire dealing damage and Firequake Augment knocking them down. And we're getting 90% ability strength from our primary and secondary. And we're taking advantage of the knockdowns by using ground finishers. And we're getting energy returns from Blight and Entropy, and if you're using the Dark Dagger, you're also getting overshields. And I'm just putting this out there, during some of my initial testing, I went 30 minutes without running out of energy with just the Dark Dagger. But now I'm currently using a rank 2 Arcane Energize to spam Accelerant as I please. And with Arcane Energize you can use whatever melee weapon you want. But don't forget to throw Condition Overload in there because you're getting free fire procs from Ember. And if you do choose the ground finisher path, or any melee for that matter, don't forget to put Pack Leader on your pet because they cannot die with the amount of melee damage you'll be doing. And now to take a quick look at the builds, I have a range build here, Growing Power and Firequake of course. And we need to keep efficiency high for that channeling skill, and of course to spam Accelerant. And at first I didn't use Steel Fiber or Umbral Fiber or any type of armor, but after getting hit one too many times I thought I'd try this out, and it's been a lifesaver. And as for Arcanes, I'm currently using Arcane Guardian for that extra survivability and Arcane Energize. And I have an almost identical build with Steel Charge that I was testing out for melee, so feel free to ignore that. And here I also have a simple Accelerant build. It's not perfect because of the polarities, but it works. Some other mods worth mentioning would be Energy Conversion and Quick Thinking. An adaptation didn't make the cut because Ember doesn't have time to adapt, she gets one hit. And also worth mentioning is Focus Lenses. Ember gets a lot of focus. And as for focus schools, if you have Arcane Energize or are efficient enough with the dagger, then you do not need Xeneric. You can go full on Naramon for melee or Madurai for damage or whatever you want. And as for these builds, these are just what I like, what fits my playstyle, but I'm sure you'll find something that fits yours. Whether you want to go full support with ability 1 and 2 and their augments, or go full on damage with only ability 2, or ability 4 ground finishers, or something hybrid, or something you've come up with on your own. Whichever the case, I hope this video helped and you enjoyed it. And that about wraps this up here. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and subscribe for more content. My name is Kovius, and thanks for watching.